It's not a good day if you're Green Bay. Hello, welcome to NFL Picks and Predictions. My name is Napoleon, and I'm reporting to you from my closet. So, it's hard to believe that the season is already over. We are already into the playoffs, and today I'm here to break down the wildcard games in the playoffs, who I think's going to win, move on to the divisional games. But first, I just wanted to take a look back at the games for the final week of the season. Cincinnati definitely held on to the end. Unfortunately, it was just not enough for them, because even though Miami lost, that kept them in the hunt for that final spot in the playoffs for the AFC. Unfortunately for them, Denver was playing with the Kansas City offense and defense that really did not care. Cincinnati was definitely exciting to watch all the way to the end. They definitely held on for dear life and did whatever they could to stay in the hunt for the playoffs, but it just was not enough. Even though Miami lost, Denver was playing a Kansas City team that did really not care about winning at all, and Denver, of course, they definitely needed to win, so sure enough, they got that win, they got the number 7 seed, and they are in the playoffs. But it was also interesting to watch some of the other games as well. For example, in the battle for the NFC, for the number 6 and number 7 seeds, we both knew which two teams would occupy those spots. We just didn't know who would get what. Fortunately for Washington, Dallas screwed up like they're really good at, and they were able to take the win at the very end of that game. And unfortunately for Green Bay, though, Jordan Love got hurt, and unfortunately for them, it takes a huge hit on the team if they do not have him as their starting quarterback. Their backup was doing okay, but if they cannot hold off Chicago, a team that they consistently beat season after season, both times they play, that definitely spells trouble for you, and I'll talk more on that a little bit later in this video. But Washington got a well-deserved number 6 seed in the NFC. As I mentioned last week, all of the wildcard teams in the NFC have a very good record for a wildcard. In fact, it's even better than the number 3 and number 4 seeds in the NFC, but also that brings up something else. Say, Los Angeles, they got the number 4 seed. They couldn't beat Seattle, but they came very close. But that was with Jimmy Garoppolo as their starting quarterback. They did come very close, but just fell short at the end, but still, for them to bench most of their really good players and still almost beat Seattle, that's still saying something. Of course, I knew Seattle definitely wanted to beat them, wanted to get revenge for when Los Angeles beat them earlier in the season, but as I mentioned in the previous video, definitely kudos to the Los Angeles Rams. They started in a hole. I thought that they were done for early on in the season. They worked their way out of the hole. They knew it had to be done to win that division, so they definitely deserve to win the NFC West and get a spot in the playoffs. And then as far as the number 3 seed, how about that game where New Orleans played Tampa Bay? I actually thought that New Orleans was going to beat them in the first half. They were trailing by 10, and I do not think Baker Mayfield has won a game where he has trailed by 10 points at halftime, but they still managed to jump ahead in the second half, even though New Orleans was putting on a game, making it very competitive. Even with a lot of their good players out and on IR, they still made Tampa really work for that win, so Tampa definitely got that much-deserved win, and they certainly deserve to have that spot in the playoffs as well. They won the NFC South for the 4th time in a row, and Mike Evans has once again surpassed 1,000 receiving yards, and he is now tied with Jerry Rice for the most consecutive seasons with at least 1,000 yards. So that was definitely exciting. When I did think New Orleans was going to beat them at one point in the game, I was watching the other game with Carolina and Atlanta. I'm thinking, okay, Carolina's playing Atlanta. Atlanta's going to trample them. That didn't really happen. Don't get me wrong. Atlanta put on a really good offense with Michael Penix Jr. as their quarterback, but Carolina, they definitely kept it competitive, and then they sent the game to overtime, and Carolina actually won that game. So even if New Orleans had won, Tampa still would have won the NFC South. However, since they won and Los Angeles lost, that's what gave them the number 3 seed, which definitely changes the whole NFC playoff picture, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the games for this week. But one more game I want to talk about was the Sunday night game. This was definitely a really good game to watch, and at first it was very competitive. I was thinking with Detroit's defense being all banged up, Minnesota's offense at least could keep the game competitive and put a good number of points on the scoreboard. That wasn't necessarily the case. Yes, it was very close after the first half, but second half, it was pretty much all Detroit. And they talked about Minnesota's defense being really good, but in that second half, they allowed Detroit to score 21 points, which that really kind of changed my perspective on both teams going into the playoffs. But with that being said, let's get into my picks and predictions for the NFL wildcard games. So let's start with the first game on Saturday, and that game is Los Angeles Chargers and Houston Texans. Los Angeles is a small favorite for this game. Point spread for them is -3. So here's the deal with both the teams right now, is that Los Angeles, while they're not playing great, they're playing good enough to be able to get enough W's to get into the postseason. And sure enough, since towards the end of the season, they didn't have too hard of a schedule. They were playing some of the bad teams, like they had a huge win against New England, and then they had a competitive game with Las Vegas in the first half. And at first I was wondering, oh man, are the Raiders going to beat them? But then, sure enough, second half, it was mostly Los Angeles. They took care of the Raiders. The Los Angeles Chargers were able to finish the season 11-6, and that is not a bad record at all for the Los Angeles Chargers, especially comparing them to previous seasons. It looks like Jim Harbaugh has definitely helped bring the team in the right direction. Los Angeles also knew they had to finish the season 11-6, so they would have a good chance at getting the number 5 seed in the AFC. Sure enough, they were able to take that because Pittsburgh lost the previous week, so Cincinnati really helped them out a great deal. Even though Cincinnati just missed the playoffs, they definitely helped carry Los Angeles to that number 5 seed in the playoffs. They said that going into the postseason, if you're in the AFC and you are a wild card, you want that number 5 seed, so you will play Houston. Here's the deal about Houston. I've pretty much said this the whole entire season, and now more people are starting to agree with me. Houston is being overestimated. Sure, they won their division, partially because the AFC South is just a crappy division right now, but also there's just a lot that they've got to work out before they can be a great team. They're definitely not a crappy team anymore like what people were used to seeing, and they were still able to finish with the same record they had the previous season. The last season with Houston, they kind of sneaked up on a lot of teams. They were not ready for them. This season, they were ready for them. In fact, for the wildcard game where Cleveland played Houston last week, Cleveland was actually the favorite to win that game with Joe Flacco, but sure enough, Houston came out, surprised them. They did lose to Baltimore in the divisional games, but they did way better than a lot of people expected. But now, a lot of people were thinking, oh, they're easily going to make the playoffs, probably make the divisional, maybe even go to the conference championship. No, that is not at all the case. I'm not saying they're not trying, and they are definitely a good team as of now, but they are not a great team, and they are certainly not a Super Bowl team. Houston definitely was struggling later in this season, but Los Angeles, on the other hand, they're definitely playing harder than they were earlier in the season. I'm not to say that either of these teams are Super Bowl teams, but right now, just as far as who is a better team right now, I'd say Los Angeles definitely has the upper advantage. That's why they are a slight favorite for this game. But as far as who is a better team right now, I kind of feel like Los Angeles is, because they're trending slightly upwards, but then Houston's trending slightly downwards. For this game, I am definitely curious to see what Jim Harbaugh has in store for the postseason, see if he can pull off some miracles. Los Angeles did have a problem earlier in the season about messing up in the second half, or not being able to do that well offensively in the second half. But in the later games they played, especially the games with New England and Las Vegas, I know that they are definitely easier teams to beat than Houston, but they were doing a lot better offensively in the second half. So can Jim Harbaugh continue that in this week in the wildcard games? I'm thinking there's a chance. I don't know for sure. I feel like the only way Houston wins this game is if Los Angeles beats themselves, as they did in the wildcard game in the 2022 season when they played Jacksonville. The first half, Los Angeles was dominating. They were on fire. It looked like the game was over. But second half, it was pretty much all Jacksonville. So in that game, Jacksonville was trailing by 27 points. They recovered that deficit and then ended up winning the game by 1 point. Could Houston actually pull that off? Probably not. But if Los Angeles is doing good in the first half, they can't let that get away from them in the second half. And I'm pretty sure this game will be different for Los Angeles than their last playoff game, knowing that Jim Harbaugh is their coach. If he's the same type of coach that helped Michigan win the college football championship, now's his chance to shine. But as far as it goes for this game, as far as who's going to win, unfortunately, I think it's all over for Houston this week. So as far as who's getting the win, I'm going to go with Los Angeles on this one. So I think Los Angeles will be able to pull off the win. Since the point spread is -3, I could easily see them winning by at least a field goal. Maybe doing a medium number of chips at most on Los Angeles on point spread would not be a bad bet. And also, if you want to just do a medium bet on money line for Los Angeles, that would not be a bad bet. The final score differential could be less than 3, as it was for Los Angeles the last time they were in the playoffs. There's a lot that could happen, but I do think point spread or money line for Los Angeles would be a pretty good bet for this game. So moving on to the other game on Saturday, we've got Pittsburgh Steelers and Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore is a pretty good favorite to win this game. Point spread for them is -9.5. Now, if you were to ask me, maybe 5 weeks ago, who I think would win this game in the playoffs, even though Baltimore has home field advantage, I would have gone for Pittsburgh. However, Pittsburgh, the last few weeks, they've been trending downward. Yes, I know that they have been losing to some really good teams, but still, it's not the offense that I saw from them earlier on in the season. I know that they have dealt with some injuries, but I kind of feel like after being on this losing streak, especially after losing to Cincinnati last week, I kind of feel like that just killed their momentum. And at this point, they could definitely keep the game competitive since the point spread is a little wide. Maybe going plus 9.5 on Pittsburgh would not be a horrible bet. However, when Pittsburgh played Baltimore earlier this season, Baltimore beat them 34-17. So it is very possible Baltimore could cover the spread. So if you bet point spread on either team for this game, I would only do a small number of chips. I would do a conservative bet. And if you want to bet money line on Pittsburgh, maybe do a very conservative bet. Their underdog odds are plus 360. So if they pull off an upset, you'll win a pretty good amount of money. But if not, you won't lose too much. But as far as it goes for this game, I kind of feel like it's pretty much all over for Pittsburgh at this point. Because as I mentioned, the last few weeks, they've kind of been trending downward. But then Baltimore, on the other hand, they've been trending upward. Baltimore has shown that they deserve to win AFC North, which they certainly did, especially after beating Cleveland 35-10 last week. At one point, I actually said that the AFC North was Pittsburgh's to lose. Luckily, Baltimore was playing better, Pittsburgh was playing worse. They were able to tie it up, and then Baltimore was able to get that win last week and be like, we're going to be the number 3 seed in the AFC. And they are. So with that being said, I kind of think for this game, regardless of the final score, it could be a blowout, it could be close. Pittsburgh definitely kept the game close last week when Cincinnati played them, even though Pittsburgh had home field advantage, and I actually thought Pittsburgh would beat them. But just seeing that Pittsburgh's on a losing streak, I kind of feel like it's all over for them at this point. But Baltimore, I still think that they've got a lot left in their tank, that they're ready to go, that it's not over for them just yet. So as far as who's going to win this game, I'm going to go with Baltimore. I do think that they will be able to get the win in the least, even if they do not cover the point spread, but I definitely see Baltimore having a fair chance at winning this game by at least 10 points. So we'll see how that goes, but I definitely think that Baltimore will be moving on to the divisional games in the playoffs. So moving on to the Sunday games. The first game, we've got Denver Broncos and Buffalo Bills. Buffalo is a pretty good favorite to win this game. Point spread for them is -8.5. I actually thought Denver would lock in the number 7 seed after the Week 17 game with Cincinnati. I thought they would beat them, but they didn't, even though it was very close, very exciting, went to overtime. Buffalo, on the other hand, they have had a very good season, as they have been the last few seasons. I believe it is their 5th season in a row for them to win the AFC East. So they definitely deserve that number 2 seed in the playoffs. Denver, on the other hand, sure, I guess that they deserve that number 7 seed, but that last win was pretty much handed to them. If we saw the Kansas City offense and defense that we are used to seeing, and they hadn't benched a lot of their players, I guarantee you Denver would not be in the playoffs right now, that we'd be looking at Cincinnati and Buffalo. Kansas City already had the number 1 seed. They're like, Denver can have this game. So they let them have it, and it's probably because they know that Denver really does not have much of a chance at holding off Buffalo in the playoffs. As I mentioned last week, all Kansas City was thinking was, okay, who do we want competing with Buffalo? Because it was between Denver, Miami, and Cincinnati. So Denver and Miami would probably lose to Buffalo, but Cincinnati, although they would probably also lose to Buffalo, they're the only team who had a chance at causing an upset. And not only that, they would have had to play Kansas City in the divisional games, and while Kansas City would probably beat them in my opinion, Cincinnati could cause another upset like they did in the AFC Conference Championship in the 2021 season. They probably, by all means, wanted to keep Cincinnati out of the playoffs, and they did. As far as it goes for this game, Denver certainly outperformed a lot of people's expectations, including myself this season. Bo Nix has nothing to be upset about. They definitely played better. They definitely are improving. And maybe they can carry that into future seasons, because that's more what they should be thinking about at this point. They have 0 chances of going to the Super Bowl, and in my opinion, they have a very small chance of causing an upset in this game with Buffalo. So with that being said, win or lose, Denver has nothing to cry about this season. This is the first time that the Denver Broncos have made the playoffs since Peyton Manning retired. They weren't that great of a team for the 8 years after Peyton Manning left. Now it looks like they're starting to come back, and I do think that Bo Nix will have a lot to offer the following season. But as far as it goes for this game, I'm gonna have to go with Buffalo. Denver's pretty much one of those teams this season that is like, hey, look at us, we made the playoffs. And they're not quite at the point to where they're like, hey, look at us, we made the Super Bowl. But we'll see how it goes. If they start to improve and start to get better as a team, they could become a Super Bowl team once again. Only time will tell if Bo Nix will be as good as Peyton Manning. I do think that Buffalo will be able to hold off Denver. I do not know if they will be able to cover the spread, because they've had games that have been very close, and then they've had games that have been almost a blowout. I'd say that it would not be a bad idea if you wanted to bet point spread on either Buffalo or Denver. Only do a conservative bet. This is not really something I'd want to risk that much on. If anything, maybe do a conservative bet on money line for Denver in case they have an upset with those plus 340 odds. But I do think that in the end, Buffalo will pull out the win, and I do not think Buffalo will choke just yet. So then we've got Green Bay Packers and Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia is the favorite. Point spread for them is minus 4.5. Here's the deal with Green Bay, is that they've definitely had another good season, even with a lot of young players. Matt LaFleur has still been able to carry the team the best he can. Of course, teams like Detroit and Minnesota, there was no competing with them, and that's why they are in the wild cards. But still, they've definitely done a really good job. They have been able to beat bad teams and mediocre teams, but unfortunately, when they come face-to-face with one of the higher-up teams, the really good teams, they seem to go down. And Philadelphia has definitely been one of those really good teams this season. Currently, Jordan Love is questionable to play for Green Bay. If he's not playing, they could kiss their chances of winning the game goodbye, because if Green Bay cannot beat Chicago with their backup quarterback, there's no way they could beat Philadelphia. As far as it goes with Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts is currently questionable. AJ Brown's also questionable. They definitely need those players in the game. I do think that Jalen Hurts will be okay to play in this game. I think Philadelphia will be able to keep the offense up that we have been seeing from them. Even the game from last week, when they were playing the New York Giants, they weren't trying to win. They benched all of their good players, and they still beat the Giants. I really think that the Philadelphia offense is still on fire, and for this game, as far as who wins, I'm gonna have to go with Philadelphia. Unfortunately, I think it's the end of the road for Green Bay with or without Jordan Love. They definitely had a good run. They've got nothing to be ashamed of. It's just Philadelphia is definitely having a much better season overall, and I still feel like Philadelphia pretty much has Green Bay's number at this point. So as far as it goes for how to bet this game, I would be a little cautious about doing point spread for Philadelphia, just seeing that it is minus 4.5. Maybe do a medium bet on money line for Philadelphia or a large bet for Philadelphia on moneyline would be a good bet just because it has minus 230 odds on moneyline. But the interesting thing is, Philadelphia did beat Green Bay by 5 points when they played them in the first week of the season, so I don't know if that will be the case for this game. I would just say do a conservative bet if you want to bet point spread on Philadelphia, just as I would about betting point spread on most of the games this week. But I think Philadelphia is definitely going to cruise right into the divisional games. So moving on to the final game Sunday, we've got Washington Commanders and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa is the favorite for this game. Point spread for them is -3. This game definitely will be pretty competitive in my opinion. Jaden Daniels has shown everybody that their season is not over just yet, and they have definitely outperformed a lot of people's expectations going into the season. Early on, we were thinking, okay, Washington may not be horrible, but they're not going to be a great team, but they finished the season 12-5. Jaden Daniels definitely pulls off a lot of surprises, and we're like, oh wow, Washington is for real. In fact, before Philadelphia's offense really took off this season, I almost thought Washington had a chance at winning the NFC East, but unfortunately for Washington, they definitely took a few hits. Later on in the season, Philadelphia was still playing great. Being a wild card spot is still not too bad. And for the NFC, the records for all the wild card teams have been really good. And as far as it goes for this game, I know Tampa's expected to win. It's possible Baker Mayfield could pull off some magic. I know that Mike Edwards and Cade Otton are questionable to play this game, which are two of their better players, and I think Tampa needs all the help they can get, because if they struggled to beat New Orleans last week, or at least had to really work for that win, they are going to have to work like 5 times harder to beat Washington this week. It definitely could be close. As far as it is for who gets the win, I'm going to have to go with Washington on this one. I do think that Jaden Daniels will be able to pull off some magic, be able to surprise some people. I do like Baker Mayfield. I know he's tried. I know he's done what he can, and I know that the team really took a hit when Mike Evans and Chris Godwin got injured earlier in the season, and they had to take some losses, but he still did what he knew he had to do to win the NFC South. So props to him. Props to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for getting this far, but unfortunately, I think it will be all over for them on Sunday. I do not think they will play bad, but I just think that Washington is going to play better. So it'll definitely be a fun game to watch, but I just really think that the Commanders will end up commanding the game on Sunday. So moving on to the final game of the week on Monday. For the wild card games, we've got Minnesota Vikings and Los Angeles Rams. Minnesota is a small favorite. Point spread for them is -1. So this game is expected to be very close. Even though Minnesota got beat pretty bad by Detroit last week, they have still shown that they are a good team, and I think Sam Darnold is definitely playing better than ever. I think he can bring a lot of good things to the team coming up in future seasons, and by far, Minnesota, win or lose, has nothing to be upset about this season. They finished 14-3. They've had one of their best seasons in a long time. Los Angeles too, as I've mentioned before. Nothing but respect for the Los Angeles Rams right now. They were in trouble earlier this season, but they worked their way out of it. They did what it took to win their division, and now they have the number 4 seed in the playoffs, and Minnesota gets to play them once again. At the surface, I would think that Minnesota would win this game, just seeing the record, but also keep in mind, Minnesota did not lose some of their star players like Los Angeles did earlier in the season, which cost them some games. One thing to keep in mind is, yes, Minnesota has had 3 losses. 2 of them were when they played Detroit. But who was the only other team they lost to this season? The Los Angeles Rams. And that's exactly why this game is expected to be close. It'll definitely be a lot of fun to watch. It will be a nail-biter. As far as who wins the game, it's very possible that Minnesota could have learned what they messed up on, or what they could have done better on when they played Los Angeles. But it's also possible that Los Angeles is like, come at us, bro. We're ready for you. This game's definitely a toss-up. It's a shot in the dark, but I just think that seeing the Rams having home field advantage, that they're kind of ready for Minnesota, that they're fired up. They benched a lot of their good players last week. A lot of them will be rested up and ready to play on Monday. Minnesota, they really did not get a break, but I do think with Minnesota losing to Detroit last week kind of killed some of their momentum, and I just don't know if Minnesota can make up for that. Like I said, this game is a toss-up, but as far as who's getting the win, after factoring factoring in the fact that Los Angeles beat them earlier in the season, their team has had more of a break than Minnesota, and also the fact that the Rams probably have more momentum on their side. As far as it goes for this game, for who gets the win, I'm gonna have to go with Los Angeles. I think they will be able to get their first playoff win since the 2021 season, which was actually the season they won the Super Bowl. Definitely be fun to watch, and not just this game. I cannot wait for all of the wild card games. So those are my NFL picks and predictions for the wild card games. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, and I will see you in the next video for NFL picks and predictions. My name is Napoleon, and I'm in the closet. I hope you really enjoyed this video. Check out some of the other content we have on this page, and make sure to subscribe so you are always notified when new content becomes available on this channel. And I will see you in the next video.